Luke 9:37 is a great passage of Scripture. Again, we are just continuing on through the Gospel of Luke, making our way through. One of the observations that a person makes as they're going through the Bible is that God does not glamorize his followers. These men and women that are held up to us as examples of faith, heroes, if you would, of the faith. God doesn't clean them up to present them more acceptable to us or more than who and what they are. Which, it's really quite remarkable if you think about it. You look at the historical context of the Bible and other ancient documents around during that time. And the historical documents surrounding the Bible, the nations, the empires, these rulers and the historians that were recording that stuff, they always took the emperors and the nations, and they just puffed them right up, exaggerated all their claims. And so historians have to go through and kind of sift through and find out what's the real history here and what was just added because some historian wanted to earn some royal favors. In contrast to that, we have the Gospels, these historical books that record Jesus' life. Dr. Luke was a physician. He wrote the Gospel of Luke, and he tells us in the first chapter why he wrote it. He said that so that we would have a historically accurate eyewitness account, from eyewitnesses of the life of Jesus, so that we would know for certainty the things in which we have been instructed. So Luke lets us know right from the onset, all this stuff is accurate to the T. The stuff hasn't been puffed up. The heroes haven't been exaggerated in it. This is so that you can know with certainty the things that you're instructed with. So in regards to Jesus' ministry and the disciples, it doesn't take long to make an observation that Luke doesn't take the facts and inflate them. Because as we're following Jesus through and we see the disciples, these very men that Jesus is going to, when he checks out, he dies, goes into death, conquers that, comes out the other side alive, and then ascends to the right hand of the Father. After he ascends to the Father, he's going to entrust these guys with the gospel to bring it to the ends of the world. And what does Luke do about them? Just records them as they are. Just records exactly what they did. He doesn't cut short their failures. He doesn't cut short their struggles. He just puts it right out there. Now, for the ancient reader, many within that general populace would absolutely mock at that. Like, you follow their teachings? These guys who are shown to be bumbling fools so much of the time, you follow their teaching? To which, the church would say, yeah, we do, because it's not the leaders that are exalted. It's the one that they point to, Jesus. And so today we look at the Gospels and we take comfort in the shortcomings of the disciples because we find in it that when they're not seeing straight, really it's a place of relief for us. Why? Why? Because a theme throughout the entire Bible, a thread, I should say, throughout the entire Bible is that God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will. He's not looking for somebody that's got their act all together. He's not. In fact, sometimes it looks as if God goes out of his way to find the lowest person on the culture that he's writing in, the cultural's pecking order to use so that everyone would know that it's God who's doing the work. Look at Moses as an example. Oh, you go with Moses, he was a prince of Egypt. He grew up in Pharaoh's own house. He's like privileged of the privilege, right? Educated in all these things of Egypt and all that. Well, is he usable by God? No, not yet. Not yet. What does he need? Does he need more education? Is that what he needs? Does he need more prosperity? Does he need more power? Does he need a greater title? Maybe that's what he needs. Does he need a greater title? Does he need more abilities? No, it's not what Moses needs at all, is it? What does Moses need to be used by God? Real heavy failure. Murders an Egyptian taskmaker who is beating up on some of his fellow Hebrew brothers there, beating up on him. He kills the guy. And he thinks now all Israel's going to know. Obviously, got on the clue bus. Clue bus just came by. Everybody hopped on, and everybody's going to know that I'm the deliverer for the Israelites. We'll, create this social revolution going on here. It's not what happened, was it? The Hebrews, his fellow brothers, look at him as if, what are you going to do, murder us too? They saw him as a murderer, and then he runs. He runs out into the wilderness, into the desert, and there he lives for the next 40 years. When God finally pulls him out of that place, when he starts to call him, the guy's got a speech impediment, probably from looking over his shoulder constantly to see if people were after him. Guilt does weird things to people. Right there, though, in the midst of failure, that's where God calls him. You look at Abraham. We could just follow this right through, right? You look at Abraham. Here's the father of faith. The father of faith. God waited until Abraham and Sarah had one foot in the grave, and everybody knew it. Sarah was full out barren. There was no way she could ever have a child, and yet God said that you're going to have a child with this woman, and there she is. At age 90, whatever it was, God made Sarah fertile. Going to have a son. And you can read about their account there in Genesis. You can read about the lapses of faith of Abraham. Some of those lapses of faith, well, the repercussions, the residual effects of it are still going on today. And yet he is the man that God took. He said, this is the father of faith. And then, one of the greatest heroes of the Old Testament. It's one of the greatest heroes for Israel in the Old Testament. David just had a little problem with lust and murder. But besides that, he was a real godly guy. Really, all other things aside, he was a godly guy besides those two things. And then he's getting the New Testament, and here we have the 12 people that Jesus chose to be apostles. Apostles, by the way, is just the designation that Jesus put on 12. So he had many disciples. He just had many. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to see him send out 70 of them, besides the 12. Okay, so there were many men and women that were his disciples. Of all that group, he chose 12, and he chose them to be apostles. It means sent ones. In the first century, the term apostles was actually used relatively loosely. By the end of the first century, when they figured out Jesus wasn't coming back in that first generation, they started to tighten up on the use of the word apostle, and they only attributed it from that point on to the 12, generally speaking. But here you have the 12, the 12 apostles, not B apostles, apostles, closest to Jesus, and you would think all of what God has been doing throughout all of history, coming to this point in Jesus Christ. All history is hinging on Jesus, on what he's going to do. You would think that the 12 that he picks to himself are just the cream of the crop, right? Of course he would pick the cream of the crop. This is God we're talking about here. This is God's ultimate plan that he's been preparing the world for. Going to choose people from the four corners of the earth. I have the whole globe before me. Of course, going to pull them out, the wisest from up here, the most sophisticated from over here. You got the four corners, going to pull them all in from all of there. The most educated. We like education in New England. We worship it. Great qualification. We're going to pick the most charismatic, the most powerful. Nope. Instead of picking the cream of the crop, what does Jesus do? Well, it seems like, at least sometimes, it seems like he doesn't pick the cream of the crop, but he digs to the bottom of the barrel. Fishermen, uneducated, from Galilee. Jerusalem was the happening spot. Judea, if anything. Galilee, that was like the backwoods. Those are hillbillies up there. You surround yourself with hillbillies? My point is, if there is one, don't think that you're some kind of treat to God. You and I are liabilities to him and his kingdom. We're not assets to him. But he loves us, and he uses us anyway, and he works beyond our shortcomings, and he works beyond our failures. He's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for willing people. He will accomplish his perfect will through us. Oftentimes, I think we're like the apostles Jesus surrounded himself with. They missed a lot of times the significant. You know, when God was asking them to, walk in faith, they often just kind of had lapses of faith. You know, the things that were very significant to him, a lot of times the disciples just skipped right over. Brush off, get them out of the way. Like, in fact, when people came to him, the disciples felt like, we can't be bothered with them. They turned around, they found out that these were some that were the most dear to Jesus' own heart. And so, not walking in faith, when he was just asking them to walk in faith. And we see that, and we'll see that today, just this lapse of faith in the disciples. And I think that's pretty significant, because God tells us that that's what pleases him. In fact, in Hebrews it says that without faith it's impossible to please him. And then in Romans, again, it tells us this. It tells us that whatever isn't from faith is sin. And just here are his 12 that are having a lapse in faith. So what you and I have to realize is this is one of the reasons why the Bible does not paint its heroes, so to speak, as larger than life. It doesn't, because the simple fact is God doesn't choose. God doesn't choose the wise or the powerful. Well, look at what 1 Corinthians tells us. We see your calling, brethren, that not many are wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world. Why? To put to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of this world. Why? To put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world, and the things which are despised, or the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not. Why? To bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh may glory in his presence. You see, the point about this whole thing is, looking at the disciples and looking at their failure, the point of the whole study is that we can be absolutely real. We don't have anything to hide. We don't have to impress anybody. We already know who we are. Base, foolish, despised. We just let God use us. Let me tell you a story, and then we'll move into our text. Story that was kind of pivotal. It was definitely one of those pivotal points in my life, very impactful to me. Some of you guys have heard it before because I've told it before. But it was a time when Brenda and I, my wife and I, we were probably about 5 years old, 6, 8 years old in the Lord, somewhere in there. We're just cruising with Jesus. I mean, we were like kind of walking, following after him. It was awesome. It was awesome. And then we hit something, and we had this major failure in our life. Which, by the way, if you steal something, they call you what? A thief, right? Or when you lie, you're a liar, right? And when you murder, you're a murderer. And so when you fail, you're usable in God's economy. So Brenda and I, we had this failure that happened. Can't remember exactly what it was. There's been so many, they sort of just blend together. But we were in that spot of, it was in our face, and we were broken about it. We were bummed out. We were repentant, and just kind of seeking God's face about it, because we felt like we bought into that whole cultural lie, you failure type of thing. And so we just felt like, man, we're just like these failures, and we should be, further ahead than this. And I can't believe, we did this, or whatever it was there. But I remember that attitude and feeling like we were going backwards and not forward, that we were losing ground. And God spoke to Brenda about it. She came to me and said, I thought because of this thing that happened that we were back at square one. Just back at square, to start all over again. And God showed me something. There are no other squares. It's just that one. And that's important. It's important to remember. It's only one square. The cross of Jesus Christ, the work that he's done, that empty tomb, of conquering sin and death, right? And then that God uses imperfect people for his glory. It's only one square. We'll always be in just that one square. Verse 37, now it happened the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, that a great multitude met Jesus. And so up to this point, there's been lots of people following Jesus, thousands upon thousands of people actually following him. He fed the 5,000, or upwards of 20,000 people there in Bethesda. He went up north. Now he was up in Caesarea Philippi, where he asked, who do people say that I am? And then from there, he went up to Mount Hermon. And the word spreads fast. People wanted to surround themselves. They wanted to be around Jesus, I should say. And so when people heard that Jesus was in an area, the word would go out and then the masses would just start to gather. Well, Jesus has been up on the mountain. He took 3 of his disciples up on the mountain to pray. That gave time for crowds to start gathering. He was there for a better part of the day, and so you could catch the picture. The crowds are just kind of coming in, and there's lots of them until there is a great multitude. Now, Jesus was on that mountain, and he was transfigured, and it was an awesome thing. It was just glorious. I mean, obviously, face shining like the sun, and his clothes just like lightning. It was beautiful, absolutely. I mean, imagine being there. It was like one of those high places. I mean, those are one of those things where you go, wow, things don't get much better than this. And they don't. Okay, there's a high place, a mountaintop experience. And from there, they left that place. Because you have to leave those places, and down into the valley they went. When they went down into the valley, Jesus and these 3 disciples, the crowds immediately start to surround Jesus as they see him. They're hanging out with the disciples. Now they see Jesus, and it's just like, whoo, start moving all towards Jesus. And the disciples, interesting thing is, the 9 that he left there, they're not there coming to greet him. Just got this mass of people around them. Why aren't the disciples with them? Well, because they're in sort of an awkward position right now. They're caught up arguing, actually, being rebuked by the scribes. Mark tells us, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this particular incident. Each one gives us some details, the other ones leave out. But Mark tells us this, he says, when Jesus came to the disciples, he saw the great multitude around them, and the scribes disputing with them. Now, disputing, that's like a nice term there. And basically what they were doing is that they were screaming, reaming them out, yelling at them. That's what happened. And so this group that was surrounding the disciples, they saw Jesus. A bunch of them starts leaving and running, going after Jesus. And of course, the disciples at this point know that Jesus is there because the crowds are leaving them and heading that way. And that's all they want to do too. They just want to get out of there. Why are they being rebuked? Why are they being disputed with the scribes? It's because of their failure. Because of their failure. It's bad enough when you fail. It's a whole different thing when it's right in your face and a group of people want to bring it right up to you, isn't it? Whole different thing. Awkward situation that's going here. They want to be out of here and be with Jesus. If anything, I mean, these guys, these disciples, if they could, if it was possible, they would hit the rewind button on life. You ever been in a situation when you were like that? Where you're just facing some kind of failure in your life and you would say, man, I would give anything to just have a rewind button right now because I would change it all. And that's where the disciples were at right now. And so these guys are bringing up their failure right into their face. Failing in private, well, I vote for that. But in front of people, I hate that. I just don't like it. Have you ever been Have you ever been rebuked by somebody who's not a follower of Jesus yet? And they rebuke you in regards to some kind of integrity issue in your life? I've had that happen. I can't say, that's a horrible thing. Like, I thought a Christian was like this. And you're like, oh, you know. Or have you ever been rebuked by a person who doesn't follow Jesus yet, when you're telling an account or giving them some information, but you're leaving out certain information? And so they rebuke you for lying, and they go, but I thought you told the truth. It stinks, right? Or, we're getting into tax season, right? Everybody loves tax season. Feed the government, they're hungry. So we need to do that. That's just like part of our deal. And so sometimes people get a little bit, they would squint their eyes at some of the numbers there as they record certain things. And dishonesty, right? And sometimes it happens to believers. And then a person who isn't a believer yet sees that and calls them out on that little issue there, right in their face. Failure. And you have your own issues of failure, however you want to add to it. But here's the scribes. They've got the disciples there, and they're disputing with them because of their failure. They're being called out because of their failure. I'm going to tell you something about being called out when it is brought to our face. We hate it. That's the place where healing happens. That's the place where we get free. That's the place where Jesus begins to do a mighty work, if we'll let him. We're going to see that. When we get called out, we have a choice at that point in time. We get all proud and obstinate, or we get humble and repentant. That's our choice. You get called out on something, you give off the air. You entered into something that was just wrong, or you failed. You give off the airs of, don't you dare correct me, right? Like, who are you to judge me? And you don't even have to say those things. You just give off that whole vibe, and everybody knows it. Don't mess with them, right? And you know what? A lot of people won't. Now, there are some people that will anyway, because it's sort of something along their calling, and you might even have somebody in your life that does that, and you go away and you go saying, this is what you say about that person. They rub me the wrong way. No, it's just that you have something to be rubbed that they're rubbing you the wrong way. It has nothing to do with them rubbing you the wrong way. Sometimes I'll sit with people, a counseling type of thing, and it's been a while where this has happened, but the walls are up. And the walls are basically saying, don't you dare step beyond my wall. And so the person will just spend all the time just talking about themselves. We call that being unteachable. Very dangerous place to be. Very dangerous. One of the reasons why the Scriptures tells us not to grieve the Holy Spirit, and also tells us not to quench the Holy Spirit, is because we could take on that unteachable attitude. God knows it. And the Holy Spirit is the one that is our counselor. The Holy Spirit is the one that sets us free. And so we start being unteachable to him, and we start saying, don't touch it. I'm not going to admit the failure. I'm not going to admit the wrong. What we're doing is we're saying, stay out of my life. And he's the only one that can bring healing. Look, if this thing was just about being spiritual, then who cares? But, if this is about walking with Jesus, drawing near to him, then I want to know. I want to know areas where I'm off. I want to know where I'm not walking head on, because you know what? I'm not playing this game. If I fail, I'm a failure type of thing. Beyond that thing, right? I'm not playing this game of what will other people think about me. No. We need to be called out at times. So to wrap up this rant, what am I speaking about with this whole thing? In seeing clearly, because we don't see clearly all the time, in seeing clearly, one of the things I want is to understand is that failing does not mean that I am a failure. Now that's huge for some people. For other people, you're just going, well, yeah, I know that stuff. Well, that's great. You need to be reminded of it. Because pride, a lot of times, doesn't allow us to admit failure because we don't like to be wrong. We think we become less of a person. And that plastic Christianity stuff has to die. Let's look at Luke 9, verse 38 now. Luke 9, verse 38 says, here it comes. Suddenly, a man from the multitude cried out, saying, "Teacher, I implore you, look at my son, for he is my only child. Behold, the spirit seizes him, and he suddenly cries out and convulses him, so that he foams at the mouth, and it departs from him with great difficulty, bruising him. If you turn over to Mark, which is the book over to the left, just turn over to Mark for a minute. Mark chapter 9, again, same incident. Mark's recording it, just a little bit more detail given to us there. I want you to see something in Mark. Mark chapter 9. And we look at verse 17. Mark 9:17. Read with me here. Then one of the crowd answered him, here's the father again, "Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him on the ground, he foams at the mouth, he gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, but they could not." Notice something just a little bit different there. Man says to Jesus, "I brought you my son. I brought him to you, and this is what he does. This is what the demon does, and your disciples couldn't cast him out." I want you to underline a word there. It's an important word. It's only a three-lettered word. If you don't like underlining in your Bible, then I'll ask your neighbor to underline it for you. Because it's big. It's the word you. You. See what the man said? He said, "I brought you, Jesus. I brought you, my son. You, Lord." Clarifies it later on and says it was your disciples I brought it to. But he says, "You, I brought you, my son." Now, Jesus could have looked at the guy and said, "No, you didn't." No, I was just up on the mountain. I don't know who you're mistaking me for, but I was the one up there glowing. Okay, I was the pillar of fire. You could have looked up on a mountain anytime. You could have seen the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud up there. That's where I was with three of my disciples. I just came down here. If you don't recall, I came down here. Crowds just gathered around me. You came breaking through the crowd, and now you're starting to accuse me. It wasn't me. I think you should recognize the difference between my disciples and me. He could have said that. But you know what? The man didn't recognize the difference. He didn't. He said, "I brought you, my son," when he was talking about his disciples. Okay, little sobriety here. We need to recognize this because this is huge. Those who are not yet followers of Jesus have a very hard time distinguishing you from Jesus. Just the way of it. You need to understand that. In other words, they recognize you by carrying the name Christian. You claim to be a Christian. They recognize you as being a representative of Jesus. Take it seriously. Some of you are going, "Well, I don't like that." Well, that's just too bad. Just the way that it is. You know, you could come up and like Christians have all these little cutesy little cliches that they throw around like, "Well, you know, I'm forgiven but not perfect." No one else understands what that means outside of the church. You know, it's say, "Well, I'm just under construction." Again, we might know what that means. Think other people do? They don't get it. Whether you like it or not, you are part of the body of Christ. Jesus is the head. Jesus is the head. We're part of the body. And you know what? What we do represents him. I don't care what other parts of the body are doing. I mean, you don't get to choose your family, okay? So I don't care what other parts of the body are doing. I care about my walk and how I'm walking before Jesus. I care about our church and how our church is representing Jesus. So we need to be concerned about. So we need to learn from this man and what he thinks. So let's get back to seeing straight here, seeing clearly. I need to understand that I represent Jesus. And what that means is that's the way that other people see it, and that is the way. And so we need to learn from this man and what he's thinking, because you and I are called to engage our culture. And we are to do it in a way that we are purposefully engaging it, and that we are purposefully being a light to this world, because Jesus has enabled us to. And so in other words, I'm not shining some political bending. I'm not shining what the latest cultural thing is that makes, people froth at the mouth. I'm not shining me. I'm shining Jesus. We have been sent by Jesus into this world. We've been commissioned. Matthew 28, verse 19 tells us, Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. Go, you represent me to this world. Go make disciples of all nations. So by the very nature of claiming to be a believer, of being a Christian, being a follower of his, I represent him, and that's the way that the world sees it. So we need to see clearly in that. Let's go on now, verse 39. It says, okay, we read this, right? Behold, the Spirit seizes him, and he suddenly cries out. It convulses so that he foams at the mouth, and then it departs from him with great difficulty, bruising him. This is not epilepsy here. It's not epilepsy. This is demon possession. Luke's a doctor, and he allows us to know this. He says it's a spirit that's doing this. So it's not some kind of epileptic seizure here that's going on. I mean, if you see a person go into an epileptic seizure, it's startling. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you go, whoa, somebody's falling on the ground. They're flopping around. And you regain, your senses about you, and you start moving things out of the way so that person doesn't bruise themselves by thrashing about. This is way beyond some neurotransmitters overfiring. Okay, this is a kid letting out some kind of guttural cries. He's convulsing. He's gnashing his teeth. He's foaming at the mouth. This is full-out demon possession. These antics are for one reason only. Fear. This is what they're about. Fear. So that when anybody looks on and they see this happening to this kid, they go, and they step back. It instills fear on them, and what they do as a result is their eyes get focused on the works of Satan, or they get focused on my own inadequacy. That's what happens. That's why it goes on the way that it does. If the devil and the kingdom of darkness can get us to react out of fear, our eyes are on us or on him. And when our eyes are on him or on us, guess what? Well, we're no match for him. Okay? We don't have that strength to fight that battle. Just read about the 7 sons of Sceva in Acts. But when our eyes are on Jesus, it's a totally different story. I was in Mozambique a few years back, and we had gone out to one of these villages, remote villages. I like to go out to remote places where the gospel hasn't gone before, or where we haven't visited. Maybe some of our missionaries have been there. We haven't visited. So we just four-wheel, sometimes for hours, to get out to some of these remote places. And they know that we're coming there. And so a lot of times the people will already be gathered. And so they're drumming and dancing and all that hours before we even get there. And sometimes they're waiting for a couple of days. because they get their days mixed up, or we're coming late, or our schedule's off, whatever it might be. And so when we get there, it's usually a big crowd, whatever many villages there are in the region. They all come out, and then we'll go around and maybe even invite people out, and then we'll share the gospel. We'll do some teachings and all, and then we'll give an altar call, and some people will come up afterwards as well to get prayed for. But sometimes people just gather. They just gather together because they've never seen someone that's been that's melanin challenged before. You know what I mean? Like pigment challenged. You know what I mean? And so some people, they just want to gather. They've never seen that before. In fact, I had this one old lady once. It was almost embarrassing. She came right up to me. It was about a foot or so away from me, just checking me out up and down. I mean, you want to talk about uncomfortable. Old lady here. And then she says something to the translator, and he starts laughing. I'm like, what did he say? And he goes, and I'm like, no, what did she say? He said, well, she said that you look like a plucked chicken. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's about the right color right in there. So anyway, that happens. That happens. One of these times, we were out in one of these villages like that. After people had heard the gospel and people responded, we gave a time for people who came up for prayer. And this actually happens a lot of times, but this is one of the first times or so that it happened like this. A lady came up, there's lines of people, and a lady came up, and I laid hands on her, and it was like shock waves just went through her body, just all backing up. And she just started convulsing like crazy, and then fell down, writhing on the ground like a snake. Well, that takes you back a little bit. You start going like, whoa, look at that. Why the antics? Why the antics? Because the devil's trying to get our eyes off of Jesus and onto either him, the situation, or onto ourselves. Because you know what? We're no match for that. What are we supposed to do with that? But Jesus, well, that's a whole different story. Right? Because sometimes, we're just in a situation we go like, well, this is just too big for me. I'm looking at my bills. I go, God, this is just too much for me. God, I'm looking at the situation. This is huge. It's too big. It's too strong. It's too powerful. It's too permanent for me. This is beyond my abilities and my skill sets. And the point? Same incident. Matthew's recording. Same incident. And this is what he records over there. The disciples came to Jesus privately and they said, why couldn't we cast him out? And this is what Jesus tells the disciples. He says, because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, like dust, that's what mustard seed is. It's almost like dust. He says, if you have faith that's like dust, you'll say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind doesn't come out except by prayer and fasting. Now, we're going to save 21 for a little bit later at the end. But notice what Jesus says about this unbelief. He says, look, it's because of your unbelief that you can't cast them out. And he says, if you say to this mountain, what mountain? Mount Hermon that he just came down from? Is that the mountain he's talking about? No, he's talking about the boy, that mountain, this demon-possessed kid that's before you, this demon-possessed child. He said, if you say to this mountain, be removed, it'll be removed. I've already given you authority to do this, Jesus would have said. And they did, right? Didn't we just read a couple of weeks ago? And for them, it was about a week and a half ago. Didn't we just read about them going out and having the authority to preach the gospel to all these villages and to cast out demons, to heal the sick? Didn't they just have that authority? What's changed? This situation caught them unawares. That's what's changed. If I knew he was going to be there, I would have baked a cake or something. I would have prepared myself. When we go into unreached villages in Malawi and Mozambique, I've got to tell you, we expect certain things in them. When we go into those villages, we expect that 7/8 of the people will respond to the gospel. We expect that. And when we're not seeing that, when we don't see that kind of response, I know that I am to press a little bit more because somebody's not understanding something. We expect when we go into these villages that demons are going to fly. We expect healings to happen. We expect it. And we walk in the authority that Jesus gave us as believers. All of us. He hasn't given authority just to a select few. He's given to us as believers. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Ready? Home. That's the problem. We get familiar with our land. We get familiar with our culture. We get familiar with our families. We get familiar with our workplaces. So instead of engaging them, instead of intentionally being a light like Jesus has called me to be, instead of recognizing that I might be the only connection that this person is ever going to have to Jesus, and instead of recognizing that, you know what we do? We go to work on Monday morning going, oh, I can't believe I got to go to work. This job work is such a drag. I can't believe I'm still at this job. Oh, my boss. And we do all this complaining stuff. Do you really think that Jesus has you at your work for the only reason that you can make a paycheck? Really? Don't you possibly think that he might have you there for others? Don't you think that some people there, you're the only person, the only connection that they're ever going to have to Jesus? I remember once I was at work years ago when I was doing carpentry, and my boss hired 3 crack addicts at once. And it was an amazing time, and I was they were all tweaking in the morning there, and it got to be around coffee time. And coffee time, a lot of times I would just go to my car and kind of take a break and read my Bible or whatever. And this time I was like, I'm just going to go out there. I'll read it with the guys and talk with them a little bit. And he opened up the door to share with them. I didn't know how many times I would have at these guys. And I started sharing with these guys, and they were just riveted. Never heard the gospel before, never heard about what Jesus had done before, never heard of Jesus' love for them before, never. And I remember coffee time went real long that day, and afterwards, I was just walking away, and one of the guys says, man, I need that. And he got saved there. But you know what, that's work. That's God has us in places for a reason. But we can just walk in this place of, faithlessness, right? You could complain about your marriage, go, just my marriage is this, my marriage is that, and I'm done. I've had enough of it. I'm up to here with all the antics that are going on there. I just can't take it anymore. Getting out of here. Horrible way to live. I know a lady that was like that, and she was, a believer, going to divorce her husband. Horrible living, that whole kind of thing. And she knew the passages about scriptures about divorce, God hates divorce, and all those passages that get thrown at a person when they're looking at a failed marriage. She also knew about Jesus' forgiveness. She knew about it. She said, I'm out. I'm done with this thing. I can't do it anymore. And so she began to just pray about that. And God didn't show her, I hate divorce and all of that. You know what he did show her? He showed her the people. He showed her the people that were looking at her. He showed her her family. He showed her her neighborhood. She lived in one of those cookie cutter kind of neighborhood type of things there. So she lived in one of those the development areas like that. And she showed him the contact that she had with her other neighbors, and he showed her how they were watching her to see how she would handle this particular marriage and this situation. And you know what happened? It changed her heart. It changed her heart. And so she began to pray. She began to pray that God would show her how to walk in faith in her marriage and how to keep her eyes on Jesus in the midst of her marriage. And he transformed her marriage. And today, their marriage is a beautiful thing. But you know what? There were others who otherwise would have never stepped foot in a church. They got to see something of Jesus straight up front. We have to be careful. Be careful. God has given us opportunity to engage our culture. He's given us opportunity to represent him to other people. And yet we could get so blindsided just because we're not ready. We could just walk in faithlessness like the disciples were doing just because we're not ready. And so and the antics, going back to the antics of the devil, right? That's what we were talking about, the antics of the devil, are to get our eyes off of Jesus, just like the things that we go through, get our eyes off of Jesus and get them on him, the antics, or upon ourselves. And so in getting back to seeing clearly, keep your eyes of faith on Jesus. Real simple, real simple. There's way more at stake than you and I can possibly imagine. There's always more going on. Verse 40 of Luke. So I implored your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. 41. Then Jesus answered and said to them, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here. This is sort of a broadcast statement that Jesus is making, definitely to his disciples, but also to other people in hearing. Faith is extremely important to Jesus, and he calls them faithless. Of course, we saw earlier that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So we know about faith. What about perverse? He says, you perverse generation. The word perverse here isn't along the lines of moral perversity. Context points that out. It means to actively be deviating from what's right or what's good. It means to be going off in your own direction rather than the right direction. Jesus doesn't throw a rebuke out there. He doesn't just rebuke for something that they were not enabled to do. In other words, look, they weren't capable in and of themselves to cast out this demon, but Jesus enabled them, gave them authority to cast them out. So he doesn't rebuke them for what they were not capable of, but what Jesus has already enabled them of. You lost your enablement because of one reason, fear. Your eyes were on you. Stop looking at self, in other words. And we've said this many times before. What Jesus calls us to is always going to be beyond our abilities. If we can do what we think he's calling us to do without his empowering, without being reliant upon him, most likely it's not him. Now, personally, I don't like speaking in front of groups of people. I mean, I do. I mean, I'm comfortable here. But I don't like doing it generally. And a few years ago, I used to just automatically say no when it was time, if somebody asked me, well, will you teach this Bible study? It'd be no. If you want to do this conference, be no. Will you teach at this school? No, not going to do it. Nope, I won't do it. Won't fill in, won't do any of those things. And then one time, again, a few years ago, God rebuked me on that whole issue. And he said, basically, he showed me this is what I was doing. I was walking in faithlessness and perversity. I was walking in my own way, deviating from the way that he did. Why? Why did I keep on saying no? Because it's uncomfortable. I had my eyes stuck on me. Sad place to be. Always playing it safe. Sad place. You read through the Bible, God takes massive risks. Get used to it. He's always going to call you out of your comfort zone. You think he just wants to leave you in this comfortable little thing and you're never going to be stretched? Wrong God. Okay? No, he's going to constantly be calling you out of your comfort zone. Let's just look at seeing clearly. So get your eyes off of self. Really, really, real simple there. Let's move on. Verse 42, because we're going to be running out of time. As he was still coming, the man was still coming, and the boy, the demon threw him down and convulsed him. Then Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit. He healed the child and gave him back to his father. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Jesus gave the child back to his father. Jesus loves to do that. Jesus loves to bring families back together, restore families. But look what happened right before this boy was healed. the antics got cranked up, right? Didn't they? Got cranked up. This is a huge common thing. What Jesus is doing a work, or Jesus is about to do a work. The enemy knows he's going to bless, or the enemy knows there's going to be this deliverance. So he does this one last-ditch effort to destroy before the blessing's manifested. Oftentimes, it's right before a person comes to Jesus, or is about to get blessed. But right before a person comes to Jesus, there's usually this massive assault that goes on. Or right before you're going to get blessed by God, massive assault happens. Why? Well, this is just the standard pre-blessing attack, okay? Pre-blessing, before the blessing happens. Right before you get blessed, the kingdom of darkness wants to crank it up to keep you from getting that blessing. See, the problem with a pre-blessing attack is when we cave into it, we never really get to understand what we are missing out on or how close we were to the blessing. Sometimes there's a fight, right? You have a fight. You're coming to church. If you're married, and all of a sudden you get into a fight in the car. Like, what happened in that car? All of a sudden there's a fight. What was that? It was a pre-blessing attack. God's going to bless you. And he's just trying to rip you off, get you from ever walking in those doors. And and on and on we could go. We could go on about it. But post-blessing, let's just talk quickly about the post-blessing attack, because that's a very real thing as well. You need to be on guard of that. Jesus came down from the mountain with 3 of his disciples. It's a mountaintop experience. And then they got smacked. Post-blessing attack. Why? To rip off what God has just put in. Always will happen. So you have this wonderful time with the Lord in the morning, devotion time with the Lord, and you get up out of your chair, wherever it is that you sit or kneel, whatever it is, and you stub your toe. Or you're driving in your car and it's just a sudden traffic jam, or you get to work and everything is absolutely out of control. Why? What's happening? Trying to rip off what God just put in. Jesus told us to be careful about that. Luke chapter 8, we just read about the parable of the sower, how God's word is sown and it goes out and it falls on different soils of the heart. One of those soils is the hardened one, where the enemy comes and just takes it out before it has time to root. Be careful of that. Okay, so we see this part, the boy falls down, Jesus rebukes him. Let's grab a verse from Matthew now, the verse 21. This kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting. Jesus said before that it's because of unbelief. We saw that. And then the second part of that is this kind doesn't come out except by prayer and fasting. Now, if I was a disciple, I don't know about you, but I put myself in their shoes at times. If I was a disciple and Jesus said, well, this kind doesn't come out by prayer and fasting, I would have said to him, that's not fair. It's just not fair. I mean, you didn't tell us that we were going to face a demon-possessed boy. You just told us to wait here while you went up on the mountain. Okay, so we were just here and we were just minding our own business, and then bam, this kid shows up with his dad. Dad and Chucky show up here and he's like frothing at the mouth. We didn't have time to fast. If you told us we had time, if you told us what was coming, we would have, but you didn't give us time. That's not fair to say it comes out by fear and fasting or prayer and fasting. What's happening is this. Jesus is calling the disciples to be prepared. That there should have been this lifestyle of prayer. There should have been this lifestyle of fasting, a lifestyle of putting my eyes on Jesus before this event ever happened. There should have been this lifestyle so that of heading into the day, and so that there would be this anticipation as I was going into the day that I'm going to be used by Jesus and I'm going to be used for his kingdom in this day. And so when it comes on, it's like, cool, I'm ready. This is great. Jesus constantly telling us, and we're going to get into it eventually here, about his return. And he would constantly be telling us one thing: be watchful and be ready, because you don't know the day or the hour. Don't let the day catch you unawares. Same thing he's telling his disciples. You need to be ready. Be ready. You need to be anticipating to be used. I'm ready. I've been praying. I've been fasting of whenever it was there. It's part of my life cycle. I'm ready for this. So, getting back to seeing clearly, anticipate being used. Let me mention something about prayer and fasting, just just quick here, because I know we're like out of time. Prayerlessness is never the problem. You say, oh, well, haven't been praying. Or, I need to pray more. That's not the problem, guys. It's never the problem. That's just the symptom. The problem is my lack of need, my lack of perceived need for Jesus. That's what my problem is. You see, I head into my day, and I don't, there's no anticipation of being used by him, and so I don't perceive my need for him. But if I headed into my day and I knew I'm going to have one shot at somebody whose life is just about over, and I'm going to be the only one that's going to be there, guess what? I'm going to find myself in the morning on my face before him saying, God, you better give me the words to say because I don't know what to speak. See, my problem is never prayerlessness. It's just a symptom. My problem is always my lack of perceived need. Okay, last 42. While he was still coming, the demon threw him down, convulsed him. Then Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the child, and gave him back to his father. And how awesome is that? See demons fly and all that. I mean, how beautiful it would have been just to be there right there. Go, wow, look at that. Jesus just did that to him. And what did Jesus say? Well, they were all amazed at the majesty of God. But while everyone was marveling at these things that Jesus did, he said to them, let these words sink down into your ears. In other words, don't miss this. The reason, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. In other words, the cross is coming. Let what sink down? Let this sink down, that the cross is coming. As awesome as the power of darkness is, and all of that is seeing the power of darkness being broken, never miss this one point. Never miss this one thing in the blessings of seeing the power of God. It's just this one point. Redemption. Redemption. Don't ever miss redemption. This whole thing, whole Bible is about one thing. Redemption. From the beginning to the end. Just one word. Redemption. So as awesome as it is to see the power of God, more awesome thing is that sin was paid for on the cross, that sin's power is broken, and that people can have a right relationship with him and begin a relationship with God. Redemption. Don't forget that place. Bunch of guys are going to be slamming into each other tonight. And a lot of people are going to be watching it. Advertisers are going to pay over $4 million a slot for 30 seconds to get a shot, to get you to buy something that you don't need. All those guys on the field, they're seeking to do well, and they're going to seek to do well. They are going to keep the plan right before their sight. They're not going to lose sight of the goal to win, but they're going to keep the plan that they have to win right before their eyes the whole entire time. Not going to lose sight of it. You know what? God has a plan. This entire book is about his plan. It boils down to one word: redemption. Redemption. That's what it is. All of mankind history, God's been working one thing: redemption. You're part of that plan. Don't lose sight of it. Don't lose sight of it. So here, finish it up. Don't forget the plan. It's redemption. Ask to be used by God. Anticipate that he'll use you. He will take you up on that offer. So summing it up, there's no rewind button on life. Failures happen. They do happen. Seeing clearly, it's an awesome thing. Awesome thing. Some of these things, one, two of these things, you might go, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need. This isn't a formula to keep you from failing. Failure's going to happen anyway. Might keep you from some stupid ones, but failure will happen. It happens in life. What allows us to take this life a little bit more deeper, a little bit more meaningful, is knowing that even when I fail and I fall flat on my face, it's not going to keep Jesus from using me. It's not going to keep him from loving me. He loves me still the same. He's still going to work through me. Failure happens, obstacles happen, but he's greater than them all. So engage. Engage your surroundings. I don't know where God has you, but he has you in unique places that nobody else is. Embrace them. God's called you to such things as